So I'm just going to scroll up and answer your questions. And please feel free to put them in. You will receive a replay. And please drop your notes. This section where we do Q&A is always wonderful. I'm interested in a training. Great. Join us. It's actually really always so I can't tell you how much I enjoy it and how much people enjoy it and what happens as a result of it. And this training's been going I've been a trainer of trainers for 6 years now, I think. And of course, things change and they get better and all of that. And what I do know is that now a lot of people that took my training 5 and 6 years ago are also doing this as their full-time jobs. And they're working and collaborating with people that they met in this training and later trainings. And it's a whole thing that's happening and it's making me very happy. So thank you for your kind words. I'm going to start with Kate. Did you find before getting into holding group spaces that even strangers naturally like to open up to you? Yes, 100%. I can talk about that for a very long time, but I do feel that people who are called to do this work have a natural calling to it. And I have always been that person that random strangers would come and tell stories, and that will not change. I may have better boundaries now. But for sure, that is something that I find to be true about most people. And I also think that most facilitators, I mean, it would be hard to be a facilitator if you didn't have a curious nature, where you weren't really, truly, deeply interested in people's stories and psychology and all of those things, because it's just a byproduct of being in those spaces. You just get to learn so much from other people. Like, you get to soak up that wisdom all the time. Like, I could do a whole class on what is the byproduct of stepping into this as a leader, is that you get to be in those spaces all the time and receive the healing and be the wisdom and all of that stuff. But yes, I think there is a common thread between people that are called to this work. Yeah. Any chance there are additional scholarships available? Send me an email, not at this time, I think, because this training is going to sell out because it's already pretty full for the 2 cohorts. And it is something that I've had this question many times. It's not something I'm necessarily against. It would be a one-on-one. I'd have to look at all the cases, and I want to set up a program in the future that actually does offer this, but currently I don't have it. But please drop me an email. It's a conversation we can have. How long do we have access to the recordings? In the training, they're always there. They will be there forever. The good news is in the training too, that every week people can send me questions and I record a Q&A that's scenario based. So if you're like, oh, so look, listen, this is my scenario. I have a team, or I want to run a retreat and I want to know if this and this, I record a video every week and it gets uploaded to the system. And every time there's a new cohort, there's new Q&A. So the materials are constantly uploaded and becoming richer and richer. Thank you, Amy. Steph, you have a question. Can you talk a little bit about the process of closing the circle? I recently held an intense grief circle for my community after a murder. I'm so sorry to hear that. It seemed difficult to wrap that up. Yes. I'll talk to this specific scenario. The closing and the opening of the circle is actually important. In the training, we will go through all these different ways that you can do it. And it's always scenario based. So you will design the way that works for your people. In this scenario, it is important. I think a lot of the scenarios that come up for facilitators happen because it wasn't addressed in the container setting. So let's talk first about how you can ensure that you can wrap something up within the time. As a facilitator, when you set the container, specifically when you do a lamentation rite or a grief process, something like that, that is going to elicit a lot of emotion in people, you would say it's going to be 2 hours. You will contain it. So you will say to people, we're going to do this and it's going to be this long. And at the end of that, I'm going to close this circle, and then there will be an opportunity to eat cake, have coffee, whatever it is that you've set up, but you need to contain it. It is so important so that people know how long they have, et cetera, et cetera. And you can also close it without feeling bad because they agree to it. This is also why you contain something. You say in the beginning, it's going to be exactly this long. And then at the end, it's easier for to say, and the time is up now. And the way that you would facilitate it is you would say 30 minutes before the end, we have 30 more minutes. And if you're noticing something like maybe one person's taking up a lot of space, then you actually move that around a little bit. So you would facilitate. So like just say we only have 30 minutes and I would love for everyone to have an opportunity to share about their experience. So let's see if we can move this along, something like that. And it's very hard to do that if you didn't tell them beforehand. So that's why containers are important. But a way to wrap something like that up is by ritualizing it. So you would say, like, now we want to close it so that you actually wrap this bubble of Kairos time up and people can transition back from timeless time into Chronos time. And a way to do it in this scenario would have been like everyone shares one word, or you put your hand on your heart, or you have a ritual act, like maybe it's putting a stone in water or a flower in a vase, or there's something that you do that's a ritual act to close the thing. And it's really beautiful to go into the design process of that. You know, I'm thinking lamentation rites or grief rituals of we're all standing by the river and everyone puts a rock in the river and says one more word, you know, that's a memory of that person or a quality of that person. Or, you know, if you're in a room, it would be put a flower in a vase, or you do something, or you create something together. You dance to their favorite song. It's something that you design that is the end of the circle, and then you all get together. Maybe you have a group hug. Maybe you all snap your fingers together. Maybe you'll clap together. Maybe you do. It's a physical act of closing the circle. Specifically, when there's a lot of emotion, there has to be a physicality of closure so that people know. Another one is you could all be hugging and moving in, and then all take one step back so you're no longer touching, and then it's closed. That's another one. The circle agreements, the very basic ones, Michelle, are confidentiality, sovereignty. Yeah, I think you're getting my thumb. Yeah. Confidentiality, sovereignty. One person speaks at a time without interruption. We don't give advice. We don't interrupt. You don't have to share if you don't want to, and please share from your own lived experience. And so don't share what you think is the truth. Share, for me, this is my experience of this thing. That's what we want to know. So those are the basic universal ones. And then I share a bunch of my personal ones, intentional ones. I always add things like listen from the heart. See if you can listen and really consecrate your attention on what is being said so that you're not practicing what you're going to say whilst you're listening. You know, that's how the magic really happens, when people can be spontaneous, and that's how the field forms. That's something that we do in so much detail in the training. What are some of the themes of your circles? Maxine question, are there categories and specialties? Yes. So often, so I have an online community, for example, and the theme of that changes every month. So then we have a theme and we work with that. I would still do a check-in, like what's alive for everyone, so I know what the temperature is. And sometimes that changes the theme. But themes could be, I mean, in organizations, so let's take an organization and I work with a team, it would be, themes could be values, you know, working around values in the organization. It could be simply what's alive for people outside of work, because in organizations, they don't talk about that very much. So it's just about connecting on a human level. It can be really wild things like animals, it really depends. I remember I had a session once. I used to do this in corporations a lot. And I worked with people who were software developers. And people were always like, what do you do with a bunch of software developers sitting in circle? I was like, the same thing. It's exactly the same. But sometimes we would, because the intention is for people to have deeper connection and creativity. It doesn't actually matter how you do it. So I remember times where I was like, tell a story about your first computer. And people get so carried away with that. And they love that question. So they tell a story and there's laughter, there's, almost tears. There's all of these emotions come in by a very, very simple question. And people feel incredibly connected after that, because guess what? You have a team of software engineers. They're all from different countries. English is not their first language, but what they all have in common is they all had a first computer, or they all played a computer game for the first time. And then they find out what they have in common with each other, and it creates bonds. So your themes can be really focused on your community and the people that you work with, and you design it that way. I see a lot of women running circles around. You can, if you're running women's circles, you could do it around the cosmological events, or things that are happening in the culture. So, in Celtic culture, there would be like Beltane and Samhain and all of those things. So you could work with natural events around you. You could work with what the identity of the group is. You could also work around what that group needs in that time. A lot of my circles are really around becoming. So I work with lots of leaders, and it's around, what is your unique genius? What did you come here to do? What is your vision for this time? What do you want to contribute to the world? And then we ask questions about lived experience. So for example, in that category, a good question is, tell a story about a time in your life where you had a glimpse of your calling, where you felt really alive doing something. And then people go into that, and it creates that field. And then they remember, and through the stories of other people, they're like, oh my God, I've had that too. That's also something I'm passionate about, blah, blah, blah. So that's how the field works. Can you share some guidelines in formulating circle questions? Yes. That's also something that we spend a whole week doing in the training. So I will spend a little time on this, but I would say always ask a question to presence people in the now. What's happening right now? What are you bringing? And then you can take them back into lived experience. And a way that you ask a question is, I always practice it in my head and think, what would be my answer to this question? And does it move me? Is that a good story? And so that's the way that I practice it. And do I have a story to that answer? And what you don't want is to elicit opinion. So your question elicits a story of lived experience. That's the guideline, not how do you feel about this? Because what you want to do is create bridges between people, and you want to create that feeling of them dropping in. And that doesn't happen if people stay in their head and they're just sharing how they've, like, what their opinion is about something. And Paul, thank you for your question. Send me an email. I'm happy to chat to you. That's another scholarship question. What types of circles have you done, Nicole? What are the intentions? Literally anything. I've worked in corporations with software engineers. I work now with business leaders. So I do a lot of leadership offsites using this technology. But I also have an online community. I run rites of passage retreats for women. And I've worked with men and women. I didn't For a time, I worked at Snapchat and facilitated circles for them full time. And I sometimes had just men in my circles too. So the intentions depend on the audience, but this technology works for any audience. So the coupon only works if you pay in one payment. Yes. Kathy. Oh, I love that. Will we learn to speak with a calm, grounded voice like yours where you only use 3 times? I love it. Yes. I mean, I'm not sure if in 6 weeks, but I think that's a result of doing this work for a long time. And thank you for that. I will gracefully receive that compliment. Thank you. I do think that when you start doing this work, you become increasingly better at sharing from a very authentic place. Like, I literally don't know how to do anything else. It's a blessing and a curse. I'm often the person that will tell the truth. And I have learned how to do it in a more compassionate way than I used to. But I do think that holding space like this, you get to be with people so much and attune to a field and to people's systems so much that you become really, really skilled at it. And it's great. Hannah, how do you hold space for someone's story if it's triggering someone else's with their trauma? Basically, the good answer to that is if you set a container well, I really believe, and I know this to be true from having done this so often, that groups constellate just so, and they are perfect the way they are. And the way that the field works, if the container is held impeccably, is that people receive the medicine and the wisdom that they need. So sometimes someone will come in, and it's incredible how this happens, that, for example, you will have someone who is, say, in a space of addiction. So working with addicts, for example, someone will come in and they will have a story of, drunk driving and being in an accident. And there will be another story who is an addict because they're really struggling with the death of someone in their family who was killed by a drunk driver. It's incredible how it happens. And you would think, oh my God, this is the worst thing ever. But you would be surprised as to once people drop in, and you do that by going through the process gently. So you wouldn't elicit a story. This story wouldn't come within the first 10 minutes, right? You're creating safety within the group. And so when you go through the process in the template gently, by the time people are in level 3 and 4 of listening, they are very different with each other. And they're not in such a triggered place. We're in a joint field then that is very nourishing. And when that story comes, you will find that that is the moment that both those people are healed rather than re-traumatized. And that's the art of holding the space. But there is a technology for that. And I don't have any examples of this going wrong in my own spaces. I have experienced it in other people's spaces that I was like, oh, you facilitated that poorly and now this happened. For sure. I've seen it happen. It has not happened to me. And I understand why. Lynn, this is very much aligned with my facilitation style. I'm starting a community and think this might be valuable. Would you say experienced facilitators will gain a lot as well? I think so. 100%. I always say too, I never stop learning. I am always constantly in programs myself and sitting with other facilitators because you learn so much just by being in the field and learning from someone else's experience. So I think this training for me is wonderful because it has all of the tech stuff and all of the templates and all of the questions and everything. But you will also learn by being in the field with us for 6 weeks and learning from me how I approach things and how I work with the emerging field, and I'll show you. And I think if there's questions that you have, you can just put them in the weekly Q&A and I will address them. Mason, have you tried ... is heard a lot in our peer support circles. Does this constitute as advice? It does to me. It does to me. So here's what I would want to say. If you are creating a space that has the intention of providing advice for people, then there's nothing wrong with that. So you can use this technology in whichever way you want. I also sometimes, people always say, does it always have to be a story that you elicit? No, it doesn't. But I do know that if you want to get to level 3 or 4 of listening, then stories are the quickest way to get there. But it's also okay to use this technology for an advice circle, or it's also okay to use this technology in a brainstorming session for a team. So if there is a peer support circle where people are really joining because they want advice, then that's okay. Then there is a way to do that. I sometimes do a round of when people are eliciting advice and they're really looking for it. Then sometimes I'm like, does someone have a story that's very alive for them right now that is similar to this, where they feel like they have wisdom to share, lived experience? That's a way to do it. Or another way is start your sentence with, I wonder. I wonder if blah, blah, blah. I wonder if, this would work for you, or I wonder if blah, blah, blah. My experience is that most people actually don't really need the advice. If they're in a well-facilitated circle, the wisdom will be in the field and they can distill it from what's there. And that's where the sovereignty comes in. So then they found the answer themselves, which will be way more compelling for them and propel them forward to do something because they found it themselves, rather than someone else told them. It's kind of that joke of the fridge magnet thing. I had this conversation with a friend the other day, and they were like, people are all looking for their purpose. And we had a whole conversation. I was like, it's really funny because, if we were to give everyone their purpose in a fortune cookie, they would do nothing with it, probably. They would be like, okay, thanks, because we have so much input all the time. And I wonder if giving people advice in a place like this actually propels them to move. Whereas I feel that if people are in a space of generative listening, they get to experience what it feels like to have the revelation on their own through the sharing of the stories, and then they're propelled to move. Yeah. That was a very full question, Mason. I could talk to that for another hour. But yes. Monica, I find it difficult to hold confidentiality agreements because I feel moved by what I learn, and that wisdom is expanded by sharing with close. Yes. I think sharing this wisdom is a higher purpose and multiplies impact than always keeping it in the group. What's your thoughts? It's a really tricky one because I think it's okay. Like if you have a really big revelation in a circle about something that you can describe in general wisdom, I think it's okay to share. But for me, the sanctity of the container is very important. It's sacred to me. And I don't ever tell someone else's story. And I work with lived experience a lot. So I wouldn't go, there's a woman and she said this, but I would say a generalization of what I would learn, what I have learned for sure. But look, this is my personal preference and experience. And I don't think there's one way to do this. I always say, I have a truth. It's not the truth. Please take from it what works for you and, leave the rest. So that's great. Paula, you registered? That's great. Awesome. I'm very excited to meet you all. Are there future cohorts on the calendar beyond May, June? Yes, the next one will be in September. I'm going to put it online next week. I'm running a little bit behind with the admin because since the beginning of this year, it's been very busy and a lot of interest in these trainings, which is really, really wonderful. And I am very busy person at the moment. But yes, September. How might this Straya, I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, how might this benefit an accomplished and experienced circle facilitator? I feel like I've answered that question already, so I'm going to move on to the next one. As a facilitator, do you share your own experience, Samantha? Yes, all the times until you get bored of it. All the time. And also in the Q&A, you have the opportunity to ask me anything you want. And my way of teaching is very much from lived experience too, because I really believe that that's a great way for people to receive information. So a lot of the stories will be from experiences that I have. And typically in the Q&A, it comes out a lot because people will say things like, I'm working with a group that is moving through trauma. What is a good question to ask them? And I will say, there once was this time where I worked with a group of people from Ukraine and I did this and this is what worked and I would do that and blah, blah. So that's how I teach it. Yeah. What if someone asks for group feedback? I think what you mean by that, Kate, is that when people are sitting in a circle and you're sharing that someone is like, I would like to know what the group feels about this. I would um, I would say that if you set the container properly, this is how I would do it, then I would not leave time for that. I would like people to stay with the question and stay with the field that is generating. And I would get back to that at the end if I want to make time for that. But I don't think I would. And I would say something like, if that's a conversation you'd like to have, you can maybe have it in the break. Maybe you can have a conversation with that person in the break yourself or in between and be like, this is not a place for giving advice. This is really a place for generating wisdom and getting people to distill information. And it's a case-to-case thing because I have done this with, for example, startup founders, and then, people are there because they want to brainstorm together. So typically at the end of the circle, there'll be like, let's do what is something that you need help with? And then we can do a popcorn of like, this person has this question who has been in this scenario before. That person, let's take 3 people. Okay, boom. So you could do it that way. There's always a way to use the technology. In the basics of it, I don't do any advice giving or inviting opinion. And that's just because I want to get people in that field of resonance first. And once they're there, then you can use that field to surf on. And then you can ask them for brainstorming or get creative with it. So the people are most creative and most sparked when they are connected and they have empathy for each other. And there is that generative field, the 4th layer of listening. Once you have established that, say if you have a whole day with people, once you've established that, then you can do whatever you want because they're so lit up. And you can take them they're more imaginative, they're more creative because they've just been using that part of their brain. So that's a good time to ask for, what do you think we should do with this thing? What's advice you have, etc. Yeah. I would say initially I always take them down the spiral first. And once they're dropped in, then I'll take them somewhere else. Connections are happening. I love that. Yeah. Thank you, Lynn. Yes, so Lynn is saying she's learned a lot this style through her work with Indigenous people, and it's so true. I start a lot of my circles by acknowledging Indigenous peoples because they're the ones that have kept this technology alive. If it wasn't for them, we wouldn't be remembering. It's incredible, but it's still alive in their communities, and they do storytelling and sit around a fire. And we've been doing that for thousands of years, and somehow in our culture, we've temporarily forgotten, and we desperately need it. Nelly, these are epic questions. I told you I could do this all day. Okay. how to pitch this to a corporation. I work in a big traditional company in the leadership program. I would love to incorporate circles. Do you have selling points? How do you pitch? I inevitably get these questions in the training too, so we'll spend more time on it there. But you focus on the outcome. And the way that I work with corporations is that I don't tell them that I'm going to do a circle with them. So I focus on, this is leadership work where we're going to build psychological safety and trust, and we're going to do team building, and we're going to establish ways of working together that are more value-based. And so you really make a list of all the outcomes that most of them we've talked about in this masterclass, and then you speak to them about the outcomes. And I often, when I sell it to corporations, I do not tell them that I'm going to create circles with them. And then I just do it when I get there. And they love it. And it's, of course, you tailor it to the audience like you would do with anything else. So when I work with leaders, sometimes we have a boardroom table and that's it. You know, we don't have a campfire, we don't have, and, you know, I would still set up the structure where I set the container. I just have agreements. They're just not aware. So maybe they don't sit in a circle technically, but the agreements are the same and the template's the same and the technology's the same. And in corporations, if someone feels called to do that work, it is so epic because the first time they do it, they're just mind blown. Everyone's like, what's happening? This is amazing. Why don't we do this all the time? And it works everywhere. And yeah, I often have in corporations when I meet them for the first time, and these will be boards and leaders, and we will meet, and you know how they can be. They'll be a bit like, let's see what this woman's gonna teach me or do here. And then I set the container, and it's really simple, right? I'll say something like, so what is something you noticed today? The spiral takes a little bit longer to drop in with a corporation because you kind of have to win them over a bit. It's different when you do a women's circle or a men's circle and people sign up to be there, they're already enrolled. Yeah, there's a different structure. So you might get them in a little bit slower. But then as soon as they get to what's alive for you or whatever, people will cry and they will be like so surprised because they might have not cried for a long time and they're not a crier and they're like, why am I crying in the middle of a boardroom? This is so embarrassing. What's happening? And it's just because they're being heard and people are listening to them and they're speaking from the heart and they also get to feel that feel. And they can't describe it. They've often never experienced it before. But that type of vulnerability creates instant connection. And very often I work with corporations and do one day with them or an afternoon with them, and it changes everything. And I just get messages from those leaders months down the track saying, I can't believe it, but that one day just changed our entire trajectory. It's really, so working with corporates to me is fun because the impact is so immediate. Haley, unfortunately with my job, I'm unable to make the training. Will there be more facilitator training? Yes, there's going to be one in September that is different times because I'm currently in South Africa. And so I had to choose time zones that work for me, both of them. And I'm going to be back in Australia in September. So the time zones will be different. Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Straya. Maxine. I run a women's book club that feels like a circle. The books we read are psychological, spiritual, and philosophical. I'm wondering if this can be a space that also serves as a traditional circle. Oh my God, absolutely. It's epic for that. Yes. In the same way, you just set a good container so that you don't get that crosstalk where people are interrupted. And so people get to experience true connection. It's actually better sometimes. They get to experience real connection through the book club. And the reason why I think it's sometimes better is because I do think that people still have a threshold that, I think something like a women's circle, for example, not everyone feels called to go to that. Or a men's circle, not everyone feels called to go to that. And for different reasons. I think also it really depends on the person running it. Like, I don't go to every women's circle I see, and think good facilitation is really important to me. And I'm not someone who loves a lot of like spirit, like a lot of talk about spirituality and all of those things. Is that's not my vibe. I like really grounded, earthy, that sort of stuff. So I would love to go to a book club where people really listen to me, for example. So I feel like there's been a lot of people who have taken this training who are running clubs that are maybe creative, like art, doing art together. And then they implement this tool and it changes everything, because not only do people come and do art, but suddenly they're also in community where they feel like they belong. So it's a game changer. And often the thing that you do becomes the door into the belonging. So the threshold's lower. So people really want belonging, on top of talking about a topic you all have in common. But what you really want is to belong to a club and a group. So wouldn't it be great if then there is actual belonging? If you actually felt like you truly belonged to that group of people. And the other thing with creative projects and things like that is sometimes it's easier to be vulnerable and speak from the heart when you have something in your hands or you're doing something, which is why women used to always sit around and embroider or, weave or do something, because then you have something that you're doing with your hands, and then you're not necessarily feeling like all eyes are on you or you have to look everyone in the eyes. You're just kind of like doing your thing and talking. You might have a book in your hands. It makes it a little bit easier. Susan, what do you mean with working with the emerging field? Do you ask questions as a facilitator during the circle to elicit on a specific person's story? Or would you just listen like other participants and hold time? Yes, I would listen like other participants and hold time. But what I mean with working with the emerging field is I would listen to what is moving through people. And what I found is that there is always a field that's forming, which has wisdom for everyone there. There's always a theme. So we're always listening for the theme. And you'll find that groups constellate for a reason. And often the theme is, you get people coming together because they're all reading the same book or they're all grieving the death of a person or, and that's the theme. But when the group is constellating for the first time and it's random, for example, in a corporation, you might have a group that you're meeting for the first time and it's an average Tuesday. You're listening for what's really alive here. And often that means that the question that you prepared doesn't work because there's something very obvious. It's my light. There's something very obvious alive in them and you need to speak to that. So working with the emerging field is listening to what is happening and then changing your question to serve what those people need versus what your plan was. And also holding the container agreements and the time and all of that. Cassie, can we sign up for the training for September next week? Yes, I will get on that. I have had so many emails today, but there goes my talking piece that I was holding. Yes, I will do that definitely by Monday or Tuesday. The to-do list, it's very big, but it's one of the priorities on it. Steve, do the training sessions guide us on designing the sessions? For example, how to engage with the client to discern exactly their goals, intentions, and how to honestly and proactively steer that conversation? I mean, you could ask that question. What this training will teach you is all of the ways that you hold a container, that you ask the right questions. So you listen to what's really there. And often it means listening for what the person is not saying. And it helps you craft the right questions. This training is very focused on group facilitation, though, but all of the tools will really help you in your own personal leadership too. Like, I must say that in terms of personal leadership, this has been the best tool that I've ever learned in my life because it has exponentially bettered all of my relationships. Like my relationship with my mom, my family is incredible. And it hasn't always been that. But there is now an understanding of how we listen to each other and how we respect each other that is beyond what I was ever taught as a child, So when you work with clients, your level of listening and understanding them will deepen a lot, and you will learn how to ask the right question. But I want to share that the facilitator training is particularly focused on group facilitation. Kate, how did you start getting paid groups? Simply by asking for money, I think. I know I'm laughing. But I would like to invite you, and this also could be a very long conversation. In the training, in the Q&A that people ask, we also talk a lot about marketing. And I would like to share that because I think this is important. I really believe that this is a skill of the future. And therefore, you should have this as a full-time job, should you wish to do this as a full-time job. And there's definitely a lot of opportunity for that. And I think it's clearly a job that's never going to go out of fashion, and you're not going to be made redundant. So this is a skill that we're going to need, is to how to work with human beings and how to inspire human creativity and innovation and imagination and all of those times. And the way that I think we're changing, I feel like I was pioneering this work 6-7 years ago. And now there's so much, I can tell by how many people are interested in these master classes and these trainings that it's changing. And I know that there's going to be a big ask, and this is going to be one of the skills. Like, I know we've had yoga and breath work, and I'm like, we're going to a place where belonging is going to be really important. And we need people to know how to do this. And so how I started getting paid groups is, I think when I first started out as a facilitator, I practiced on my friends and my family and all of those things. And then after a while, when I started getting confident and comfortable with it, I just charged people, and I ran workshops and retreats, and it started on a small scale, and then it went faster. But I want to share that for me, I had to figure this all out. So it wasn't as easy as, oh, I saw an ad on Instagram and there was a masterclass and there was a training. This training didn't exist. And I had to learn it by doing it. And then later on, I did get to do all the trainings, so you don't have to do all of those. But it wasn't something that you could just learn online, or it wasn't something. So it took me a lot longer to get started. And my desire is, like, I want to teach this skill to people so they can get going with it. So it doesn't take you 5 or 6 years to become good at it. And you do have the confidence to ask money, and you don't feel like such a pioneer because we're all doing it. I'm very passionate about that. I feel like there's no point in sharing this skill if we can't make it our livelihood, because then there will be no impact either. At some point, if you're very passionate about doing this work, then there's a job there for you. Thank you, Tess. Thank you, Siv. Oh, thank you. Avina, how do you keep time and hold space effectively without interrupting people? I do interrupt people. You just don't let other people interrupt people. But if people are not honoring the agreements, I will interrupt them. So for example, timekeeping, you can say something like everyone gets 2 or 3 minutes to share, and there will be maybe a bell that says 30 seconds left. And then if someone goes an extra minute over, you'll say, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to stop you there because we need to honor the time so everyone has an opportunity to share. The end. So I do. I always say I'm kind of a bit fierce, but more on the fiercer side. And it's good. I think people feel safe when you are fierce as a facilitator. If you let things flow and interrupt or dishonor the agreements, the safety will be compromised. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, you will get the recording. I do facilitate online circles occasionally. Yes, Steve. I'll keep you posted on that. Thank you for those of you that have registered. That's amazing. Gracias, Tita. I look forward to meeting you. I used to live in Colombia, so I have a deep connection to that place, and I always love meeting people from Colombia. So, eh, un gusto. Steve, what cultural variations have you seen when conducting circles? Oh, this is a great question. Loud, obnoxious American in a room with quiet Korean sort of spaces. I love it. It's a great question. This is all again about container setting, and then as the facilitator being really rigid with keeping people to the containers. And there's something about cultural sensitivity that's important in the manual and in the training. We do talk about that. I think if you are going to, depends on where you are, right? But say this scenario, for example, if you are aware that the group that you are going to work with is very diverse and maybe people aren't, English isn't their first language, for example, and some people it is, your container setting is so tight. And you would be aware of things like not using metaphor as in your questions so that it's really clear and really direct. And in those types of circles, you would say things like very tight with your timekeeping. Everyone gets 2 minutes to share, and this is really important. So you'll see me here with my bell. When you hear it, the next person, and so you would be just extra tight. And it can be challenging for people, but if you do it well, it's not a problem at all, and they really appreciate it. I have a lot of experience with this, and I can hand on heart say it works really well. Yeah. I think, oh my God, that's the end of the questions, and we're at 8:56. I will share the September training with you when I get there. Thank you so much for being here today. It was a privilege and a pleasure as always. I will send out the replay when I have it. It always takes a little while to cut it up. But if you have any further questions about the training, send me an email. And I look forward to meeting some of you in person. And otherwise, just keep an eye out on the website with other offers that come up and all of that. So remember, if you sign up by Monday, you get $100 off. And that's all I have to say. Thank you for being here. I look forward to meeting you soon. Bye.